There's a lake in Canada where the water glows. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally glows. A ghostly pale luminescence rising from the surface in the darkness, as if something beneath the water is trying to send a signal to the sky. Scientists have been studying it for decades. They have theories. The theories do not fully explain it. That is one place on this list. It is not the strangest one. Canada is a country that presents itself with a kind of rational confidence. It has universal health care. It has a functioning legal system. It has scientists in good universities with adequate funding and functioning microscopes and access to satellite imagery of every square kilometer of its territory. It is not, on the surface, the kind of place that harbors the unexplained. And yet, the lakes that behave in ways lakes are not supposed to behave, the craters that appeared without warning or meteorological cause, the magnetic anomalies so powerful they pull compasses sideways and make pilots nervous, the sounds coming out of the ground in the far north that nobody has been able to source, the forests where entire survey teams have gotten turned around in perfectly clear weather on perfectly clear days and come out 30 kilometers from where they were supposed to be. Canada is 10 million square kilometers of land, and most of it is wilderness, so absolute that even now, in 2026, with GPS and satellite phones and drone mapping, there are places where the scientific instruments behave strangely and the explanations do not quite arrive. This is not a video about folklore. It is not a video about legends or campfire stories or the comfortable kind of mystery that exists to be thrilling without being real. This is a video about places where the physical evidence, the measurable, documented, peer-reviewed physical evidence, refuses to conform to the models that scientists built to understand it. Places where the numbers do not add up. Where the geology says one thing and the physics says another. Where the biology of a creature that should not exist keeps showing up in the sample data. Where the sounds recorded on calibrated equipment do not match any known source in any scientific database on Earth. 13 locations. 13 genuine, documented, argued over, still unresolved scientific puzzles. We are going to travel from the bottom of an Ontario lake to the edge of the Arctic Ocean, and at every stop, I'm going to tell you exactly what the scientists found, exactly what they cannot explain, and exactly why the best answer any credible researcher has been able to give is, in the careful, qualified, maddening language of peer-reviewed science, that they are not entirely sure. We are starting in British Columbia. We are starting with a lake that should not exist in the form that it does, doing things that no body of water on this planet has been documented doing in quite the same way. This is location 13. Location number 13, Spotted Lake, British Columbia, the lake that rearranges itself. Every summer drive west out of Osoyoos, British Columbia, along Highway 3. And at a certain point in late summer, you will see something through the car window that will make you question whether you are awake. There is a lake beside the road. The lake is divided, not by fences or walls or any human intervention, but by the lake itself, into dozens of distinct, perfectly defined circles of color: green, blue, yellow. Some of them the color of old turquoise, some the color of new moss, some a pale, almost clinical white that looks chemical rather than natural. The circles are separated by mineral walkways, ridges of deposit that harden on the surface as the water evaporates in the summer heat. The result is a body of water that looks, from above, like a painting someone made on the landscape without intending it to be subtle. This is Spotted Lake, known to the Syilx Okanagan people as Kliluk, and it is one of the most chemically concentrated lakes on Earth. The water is saturated with magnesium sulfate, calcium, sodium sulfates, and 8 other minerals in concentrations so extreme that when summer evaporation pulls the water level down, those minerals crystallize and separate into distinct pools according to their individual chemical properties. Each circle is chemically distinct from its neighbors. Each one is a different color because of what it contains, not because of what is above it. The depth of the water in those pools at peak summer can be measured in centimeters. It is, in the most literal sense, a lake that unmakes itself every year and then waits for winter to remake it. The Syilx Okanagan have known about Kliluk for far longer than Western science has had instruments to measure it. The lake's mud was historically used for medicinal purposes, different pools for different ailments, a pharmacological specificity that implies a sophisticated, long-accumulated knowledge of the lake's chemistry long before chemistry as a discipline existed. During the First World War, minerals were harvested from the lake for munitions production. That piece of the history is not in dispute. What is in dispute is the mechanism by which the pools retain their distinct chemical identities year after year, season after season, refilling and re-separating with a consistency that the standard model of surface water chemistry does not cleanly predict. The borders between pools, the mineral walkways that define them, should be permeable. The chemistry should blend. It does not. The lake resists the explanation that would make it ordinary. Every summer it reassembles itself into the same improbable mosaic, and the scientists who study it keep filing reports that end with language suggesting further study is warranted. That is the scientific phrase for, "We are not done being puzzled by this." Location number 12, the Sault Ste. Marie Magnetic Anomaly, Ontario. Where compasses go to lie. There is a stretch of northern Ontario in the region around Sault Ste. Marie and extending into the Canadian Shield in the direction of Sudbury, where magnetic compasses do not point north. They point in directions that range from slightly off north to dramatically wrong entirely, depending on exactly where you are standing. And the variations happen over distances, small enough that taking a single step can shift your compass reading by several degrees. This is not a minor calibration issue. This is not the ordinary magnetic declination that affects compasses everywhere on Earth and is accounted for in every navigation system. This is something different, something localized, something that has been measured and documented and argued about for well over a century without producing a complete, universally accepted explanation. The Canadian Shield is ancient rock, among the oldest exposed rock on the surface of the planet, in some places dating to over 4 billion years old. An ancient rock in this part of the world tends to contain significant concentrations of magnetite and other iron-bearing minerals that can produce local magnetic distortions. This is the standard explanation for what happens to compasses in this region, and it is not wrong. The iron is there. The magnetite is there. The measurements confirm it. But the scale and the variability of the anomaly, the way it shifts and intensifies and relaxes across distances that the mineral deposits alone do not fully account for, has led some geophysicists to argue that there is something else going on, something about the structure of the rock deep below the surface, something about the way the ancient geology of this particular part of the shield interacts with Earth's magnetic field that the mineral concentration model does not entirely capture. Pilots who fly regularly over this region have their own vocabulary for it. They know which routes require extra attention to instrument confirmation. They know which areas will produce the readings that experienced pilots learn to cross-reference against GPS and visual landmarks, because trusting the compass alone in that airspace is understood to be unreliable. That knowledge is practical and empirical and passed between aviators the way all flight knowledge is passed, through experience and caution and the accumulated wisdom of people who have learned, in some cases the hard way, that the instruments in this part of the world require a second opinion. The scientific literature on the Sault Ste. Marie anomaly is genuine and ongoing. The full explanation is not, as of 2026, complete. Location number 11, Lake Ontario's missing thermocline, Ontario. The physics that isn't there. Every large, deep freshwater lake on Earth develops a thermocline. This is not an optional feature of lakes. It is a physical inevitability. The layer where warm surface water, heated by the sun, meets the cold, dense water below, and the two refuse to mix because the density difference between them is too great to be overcome by normal circulation patterns. The thermocline is how deep lakes maintain their biological complexity, how they store cold water at depth through the summer, how they regulate the chemistry of the oxygen cycle that keeps their ecosystems alive. In large, deep lakes, the thermocline is as reliable as gravity. It is not something that is sometimes there and sometimes not. It is something that is always there, behaving in predictable ways, because the physics that produce it do not take days off. Lake Ontario's thermocline behaves strangely, not all the time, not in ways that show up every year in the same place or in the same pattern, but in documented episodes, across multiple decades of measurement by Canadian and American research programs, the thermocline in Lake Ontario has been observed to collapse in localized areas, to simply cease functioning as a thermocline, and allow the mixing of water layers that should, by every physical model available, remain separated. Cold water from depth appears at the surface in places and at times that upwelling patterns do not predict. Temperature gradients reverse. The lake does things that lakes the size and depth of Ontario are not supposed to be able to do, given the energy budget available from wind and surface heating alone. There are theories. There are always theories. Some researchers have pointed to the specific bathymetry of Lake Ontario's bottom, the underwater ridges and basins, and the particular shape of the lake floor, as creating internal wave patterns that can occasionally destabilize the thermocline in ways that are real but difficult to model. Others have implicated the influence of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the very particular hydraulics of water moving in and out of the lake through a system that is partly natural and has been partly engineered for navigation. None of these explanations has produced a model that reliably predicts when and where the anomalous mixing events will occur. They happen. They are measured. They are documented. They are not, in the precise and demanding sense of scientific prediction, understood. Location number 10, the bloop analog, Hudson Bay, the sound no one can source. In the spring of 2012, a researcher with the Canadian Hydrographic Service was conducting routine acoustic monitoring in the southern portion of Hudson Bay when the recording equipment captured something. The sound was low, very low, in the infrasound range that sits below the threshold of human hearing, but well within the detection range of calibrated hydroacoustic equipment. It was also, by the standards of what the equipment normally captures in Hudson Bay, loud. Loud enough to be recorded on multiple sensors simultaneously. Loud enough to triangulate with meaningful precision to a general area of the bay. Not loud enough and not familiar enough in its acoustic profile to be identified. What followed was the kind of scientific investigation that produces more questions than answers. The sound did not match the acoustic signature of any known geological process documented in Hudson Bay. No seismic event of relevant magnitude was recorded in the region at the relevant time. It did not match shipping noise. The frequency profile was wrong, and the pattern of the sound structure, the way it rose and fell and modulated over its duration, was inconsistent with engine noise or propeller cavitation or any other source associated with marine traffic. It did not match any cataloged biological sound produced by any species known to inhabit Hudson Bay. It did not match ice. The specific cracking and grinding signatures of sea ice movement are well documented and acoustically distinctive, and this was not that. Hydroacoustic anomalies in large bodies of water are not rare. The oceans are full of sounds that have required years of patient research to identify and classify, and a few that remain classified as unknown. Hudson Bay is a semi-enclosed inland sea with its own peculiar acoustics, its own complex of currents and ice and biological activity and geological structure beneath. It is possible that what was recorded was the product of some combination of known processes interacting in an unusual way that the existing models had not anticipated. It is also possible that it was something else. The sound was documented. The documentation was circulated. The explanation, as of the most recent literature available, remains in the category that scientists handle with the careful, non-committal language of ongoing inquiry. Nobody has said what it was. Nobody has said, with confidence, what it was not. Location number 9, the Moberly Lake Lights, British Columbia, the fire that doesn't burn. There is a tradition among the people who have lived around Moberly Lake in northeastern British Columbia for longer than written records reach of not going to the lakeshore after dark on certain nights. The reason for this tradition is specific. It is not a general unease about darkness or water. It is the lights. Lights that appear over the surface of the lake, sometimes floating just above the water, sometimes rising higher, sometimes appearing to move laterally across the lake's surface, with a purposefulness that random atmospheric phenomena do not typically display. The lights have been described by multiple generations of observers, by indigenous people whose families have been in this territory for centuries, and by settlers and their descendants, who have lived on the lake since the late 19th century, with a consistency of detail that is itself a kind of data point even before any instrument is involved. Ball lightning is the first explanation that atmospheric physicists reach for when confronted with documented light phenomena over water. And for good reason. Ball lightning is real. It is poorly understood. It appears over bodies of water with a frequency disproportionate to its appearance over dry land, and its behavior can include movement that appears purposeful and a persistence that defies the expectations of casual observers. The atmospheric conditions around Moberly Lake, the specific combination of elevation, surrounding terrain, humidity patterns, and the electrical characteristics of storms that move through the Peace River region are consistent with conditions that produce ball lightning elsewhere. This is a reasonable scientific hypothesis. It does not fully account for the reports. What the ball lightning hypothesis struggles with is the season. Ball lightning is associated with thunderstorm activity, with the charged atmospheric conditions that develop in warm weather. The lights at Moberly Lake have been reported in winter, on clear nights, in the absence of any electrical storm activity for hundreds of kilometers, in temperatures that would make the atmospheric conditions required for ball lightning generation essentially impossible. There are other hypotheses. Piezoelectric effects from the geological activity of the fault systems that run through that part of British Columbia, producing light through the mechanical compression of crystalline rock structures in the ground beneath the lake. There is documented laboratory evidence that piezoelectric effects can produce visible light under the right conditions. Whether the geological activity in the Moberly Lake region is sufficient to produce visible light phenomena above a lake surface on clear winter nights is, as of the most current research, unconfirmed. The lights keep appearing. The explanations keep falling slightly short. Location number 8. Caribou Lake Crater, Ontario. The hole that appeared without explanation. In the boreal forest of northern Ontario, approximately 250 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, there's a lake that is almost perfectly circular. Not roughly circular, not approximately circular, but geometrically circular in a way that natural lakes, which form through the irregular processes of glaciation and erosion and the idiosyncratic paths of rivers and meltwater, almost never are. The lake is Caribou Lake. It sits in a bowl of disturbed rock that has been shattered and recrystallized in a pattern that geologists recognize as the signature of a hypervelocity impact. The specific geological fingerprint left when something moving at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour hits the Earth's crust and transfers its energy to the surrounding rock in a fraction of a second. Caribou Lake, the geology says, is a crater. Something hit here. The crater formed. The depression filled with water. Here is what is strange. The crater has never been conclusively dated. The rock deformation is consistent with an impact, but the specific dating techniques that work on impact craters elsewhere, techniques that rely on the presence of particular minerals produced only under the extreme temperatures and pressures of a hypervelocity collision, have produced results at Caribou Lake that are either ambiguous or inconsistent between different research teams. The impact happened. The evidence for that is not seriously contested. When it happened and how large the impacting object was, and why the geochemical signature of the crater does not cleanly match the models that predict what large impacts should leave behind. These questions remain open in the published literature. One study says the Precambrian. Another study's dating is not inconsistent with a much more recent event. The crater sits in the boreal forest without a signpost, without an interpretive center, being slowly mapped by researchers who have not finished arguing about what they are mapping. Location number 7, the Hesquiat Peninsula. Sound anomaly, British Columbia. What the ocean is saying that no one understands. The Hesquiat Peninsula juts into the Pacific on the west coast of Vancouver Island, in the territory of the Hesquiat First Nation, in a region of ocean so exposed and so energetically dynamic that the swells arriving at its headlands have traveled from thousands of kilometers offshore without anything to slow them down. The sea here is serious. It is the kind of coast that has claimed ships and continues to demand respect from everyone who approaches it. And it is the coast where, documented in multiple independent records going back to the late 19th century, there is a sound. The sound is not the ocean. People who have lived on this coast for generations know what the ocean sounds like in every mood and condition, and they do not confuse the sound with surf or with wind or with the particular percussion of a heavy swell against a rock wall. The sound is described consistently as a low, rhythmic pulsing, not the irregular rhythm of waves, but a metronomic regularity that suggests mechanism rather than nature. It has been recorded. The recordings have been analyzed. The frequency is real. The source, the physical, identifiable, locatable source of the sound, has not been found. Research teams from the University of Victoria have conducted acoustic surveys in the region. They have not, in the published results of those surveys, offered a confirmed source. The geological explanation, that the sound is produced by the resonance of water moving through underwater sea caves in a particular tidal condition, is the leading hypothesis. The problem is that the sound has been documented under tidal conditions where that explanation does not apply. Not most of the time. Some of the time. Enough to keep the question alive in the literature, and enough to keep the Hesquiat people watching the ocean with the particular attention of people who know that the coast tells you things if you are paying the right kind of attention. Location number 6. Lake Superior's cold water plumes, Ontario/Minnesota, the upwelling that defies the calendar. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake on Earth by surface area. It contains 10% of the world's surface freshwater. It is, in physical terms, closer to an inland sea than to what most people picture when they think of a lake, and it behaves accordingly, developing its own weather systems, generating waves that can reach 9 meters in height during storms, maintaining a water temperature cold enough to preserve the bodies of drowned sailors for years, because the lake does not, below certain depths, produce the bacterial activity required for decomposition. Lake Superior is extraordinary by every measure, and scientists have been studying it with dedicated research programs for over 100 years. And yet, it does things that the models built to understand it still do not fully predict. The cold water plumes are the most documented of these. In the deep western portion of the lake, in water that is already cold by the standards of freshwater systems, plumes of even colder water have been detected rising from extreme depth to the surface in patterns that the standard models of lake circulation do not predict and cannot, even in retrospect, adequately account for. The water in these plumes is colder than the surrounding deep water. It is not simply cold deep water being brought to the surface by wind-driven upwelling. It is anomalously cold water, water that is colder than the temperature profile of the lake, at any measured depth in the area where the plumes originate, appearing at the surface and then dispersing. The thermal energy budget of the lake does not explain where water colder than the coldest measured depth water is coming from. One hypothesis, a hypothesis that has been published and taken seriously and not refuted, is that there are hydrothermal vents on the floor of Lake Superior that are producing water cold enough to register as anomalous, even by the standards of a lake where the bottom temperature is already just above freezing. Cold water vents, driven not by volcanic heat, but by chemical reactions in the deep rock. It is a geological hypothesis that has not been confirmed by direct observation of the lake floor. The plumes keep appearing. The bottom remains in those deepest sections, unvisited by any instrument capable of settling the question. Location number 5, the Miramichi Valley Ghost Lights, New Brunswick, the folklore that passed the lab test. There's a long, gentle river valley in New Brunswick, running through Miramichi country in the center of the province, where people have been reporting lights for as long as there have been people there to report them. The Mi'kmaq called them something that translates approximately to spirit lights. The Acadian settlers who came after them called them feux follets, fool's fire, and built a substantial body of folk belief around them. Beliefs about what the lights meant, where they came from, what happened to people who followed them. The English settlers called them will-o'-the-wisps and treated them as either supernatural or explicable, and either way not worth worrying about too much. The lights persisted regardless of what anyone called them. In the 1970s, a team of researchers from the University of New Brunswick went to the Miramichi Valley with instruments. This is the detail that separates the Miramichi lights from the general category of ghost light folklore. They were studied seriously with calibrated equipment by people whose professional reputations were attached to the accuracy of their measurements. The instruments detected something. The lights were real in the sense that they registered on equipment designed to detect electromagnetic radiation. They were not, the instruments confirmed, reflections of distant vehicle headlights, a common debunking for similar phenomena elsewhere. They were not the phosphorescent glow of decaying organic material. They were not static discharges from the electrical grid. They were sources of light in a spectrum consistent with combustion, appearing in locations where no combustion source could be identified, persisting for durations inconsistent with any accidental ignition event, and behaving in ways, the lateral movement, the rising, the occasional apparent response to the presence of observers, that none of the standard atmospheric chemistry explanations cleanly account for. The researchers published. The lights did not stop appearing. The explanation did not arrive. The Miramichi Valley remains in the scientific literature on anomalous light phenomena in North America, one of the better documented and least resolved examples. Location number 4, Kelowna and the Okanagan Lake. Anomaly, British Columbia, the sonar reading that started a century of argument. Okanagan Lake is long, deep, cold, and heavily visited. It runs through the heart of British Columbia's wine country, past the city of Kelowna, and into a southern interior landscape that has become one of the most popular recreational destinations in Western Canada. It is, in other words, a well-observed lake. People are on it and in it and around it constantly. And for well over 100 years, a significant number of those people, not fringe observers, not people seeking attention, but ordinary residents and visitors whose descriptions have been collected, cataloged, and treated seriously enough to be included in academic discussions of the phenomenon, have reported seeing something in the water that they cannot identify and that does not match any species known to science. The creature has a name, Ogopogo, a name given to it in a 1926 newspaper that was itself covering reports already decades old by that point. The indigenous peoples of the Okanagan, the Syilx Nation, have their own name for the entity they describe as inhabiting the lake, Naha-a-itk, the lake spirit or the sacred creature of the water. Their relationship with the lake and with the entity they describe in it is ceremonial and complex, and long predates any settler arrival in the region. This context matters because it situates the reports not as isolated modern sightings, but as part of an ongoing, culturally embedded relationship with something in this lake that the people who have lived on its shores for centuries have never treated as ordinary. In 2000, a researcher from Kelowna used side-scan sonar to map sections of the lake floor. The sonar returned images. Some of those images showed features on the lake floor that were consistent in their dimensions and in the symmetry of their profiles with large biological objects. Objects several meters long, with profiles that the researcher described as inconsistent with rock formations or debris, and consistent with the size range of large vertebrate animals. The images were published. They were examined by biologists. The biologists did not confirm a new species. They also did not produce a satisfying alternative identification for the features shown. The sonar images are in the literature. The lake is still being watched. Okanagan Lake is 350 meters deep in places, cold enough at depth to slow decomposition, and large enough that a viable breeding population of large animals could exist in it for decades before being conclusively documented by science. That is not a claim that such a population exists. It is a statement about the size and opacity of the lake relative to the tools currently deployed to study it. Location number 3, the Rendlesham of Canada, Falcon Lake, Manitoba, and the encounter that left physical evidence. On May 20th, 1967, a man named Stefan Michalak was prospecting for quartz veins along the eastern shore of Falcon Lake in Manitoba's Whiteshell Provincial Park. He was an industrial mechanic by trade, a careful man, methodical in his habits, not given to dramatic claims or public attention. At approximately noon, he observed 2 aircraft approaching from the southwest, or what he initially assumed were aircraft. One of them landed on a flat rock outcropping approximately 50 meters from where he was working. He approached it. He examined it closely enough to sketch its exterior structure in detail. He reached out and touched its surface. The surface was warm. It began to rotate. An opening in the surface from which he had smelled something sulfurous closed. The craft departed. What happened next is documented in ways that are difficult to dismiss and impossible to fully explain. Michalak was ill immediately. Nauseated, headache, a burning sensation on his chest. He made his way back to the highway and into Winnipeg, where he sought medical attention. The burn pattern on his chest was specific, a geometric grid of small circular burns, precisely spaced, consistent with the grillwork opening he described on the object's surface, and inconsistent with any thermal injury pattern that burn specialists at the University of Manitoba Hospital, who examined him, could account for through conventional means. The grass at the landing site was burned. The rock showed evidence of elevated radiation, specifically radioactive contamination at levels documented by a team from the Canadian government's Radiation Protection Division, which investigated the site and confirmed anomalous readings. The contamination was real. It was localized to the landing site. It was not explained by any known industrial or military activity in the region. Stefan Michalak spent years seeking a prosaic explanation for what happened to him. He was investigated by the RCMP, by the Canadian government, by private researchers, and by journalists. Nobody accused him of fabricating the physical evidence because the physical evidence, the burns, the radiation, preceded any public claim he made. He did not seek publicity. He sought consistently and for the rest of his life an explanation that would make his experience ordinary. The Canadian government investigation, conducted by the Department of National Defense and the Radiation Protection Division, concluded that the source of the radioactive contamination at the site could not be determined. That conclusion was not revised. Falcon Lake is a provincial park. The rock outcropping is still there. The documentation of what happened on May 20th, 1967 is in government archives. The explanation is not. Location number 2, the numbers, Station of the Prairies, the signal from nowhere in Alberta, in a certain frequency range of the AM radio spectrum, in specific locations across the Alberta prairie. Locations that shift, that do not always correspond to permanent infrastructure, that move in ways that do not map cleanly onto known transmitter locations. There is a signal. The signal has been documented by amateur radio operators in the region for several decades. It has been analyzed. Its characteristics have been described in the community of hobbyist listeners who catalog anomalous radio signals with the patience and precision that the hobby demands. The signal is not random noise. It is structured. It repeats in patterns. It contains what appear to be encoded sequences, not Morse code, not any standard modulation scheme in the public registry, but something with an internal logic that multiple independent analysts have confirmed is present, even when they cannot agree on what the logic encodes. The standard explanation for anomalous structured radio signals on AM frequencies is that they are military or government transmissions. The Canadian forces maintain communication infrastructure across the prairies. The American military operates systems whose signals propagate into Canadian territory. There are legitimate national security reasons why certain transmissions are not publicly documented. This is a reasonable explanation. It is the explanation that most of the people who have studied the signal apply to it by default, and in the absence of a better explanation, it is the one that sits in the plausible but unconfirmed category. What makes it slightly more complicated than a simple case of classified military communication is the signal's geographic behavior. It moves. The apparent source location, triangulated by multiple operators, working simultaneously from different positions, shifts over distances of tens to hundreds of kilometers in ways that do not match the behavior of a fixed transmitter. A fixed military transmitter does not move. A mobile one might, but the pattern of movement does not correspond to any known military exercise schedule or vehicle convoy route in the region. The signal appears and does what it does, and the people who have been listening for decades still debate what it is, and the official response to inquiries about it has been uniformly silence. Location number 1, the Nahanni Valley, Northwest Territories, where the science stops and something else begins. The South Nahanni River cuts through the Mackenzie Mountains of the Northwest Territories with the indifferent power of a river that has been doing exactly what it is doing for millions of years and has no interest in the opinions of the geologists who study it. The canyon it has carved, Virginia Falls, 2 times the height of Niagara, sitting in a wilderness so remote that most Canadians have never seen a photograph of it, is one of the most spectacular pieces of geology in North America. The valley around the river is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has been called, by people who have traveled there, one of the most profoundly beautiful and profoundly strange places on the surface of the earth. The strange part is not metaphorical. The Nahanni Valley is anomalously warm. In a region where winter temperatures regularly reach -40 degrees Celsius, the valley maintains temperatures consistently warmer than the surrounding terrain, warm enough to support plant species that have no business being at that latitude, warm enough that certain sections of the valley floor remain unfrozen through winters that freeze everything for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The geothermal explanation that there is subsurface volcanic or hydrothermal activity warming the valley from below has been advanced and studied and not confirmed by any drilling or seismic program. The specific source of the warmth has not been identified. It is measurably there. It is not explained. The valley's human history adds a layer that the geology alone cannot account for. Over a dozen prospectors and explorers entered the Nahanni Valley in the first decades of the 20th century and were found dead, or not found at all. 2 brothers named MacLeod entered the valley in 1908, looking for a gold deposit they claimed to have found on a previous trip. Their skeletons were found the following year, decapitated. The heads were never recovered. The deaths that followed over the next 3 decades were various in their manner and circumstances, some clearly attributable to the ordinary hazards of wilderness survival in extreme terrain, some less clearly attributable to anything. The valley acquired a name, the Headless Valley. The name was sensationalized by journalists and later by the tourism industry, which is not a reliable editorial process. But the deaths were real. The missing heads were real. The explanations were, and in some cases remain, incomplete. The Dean people, whose territory the Nahanni has always been, describe the valley as inhabited by a race of people they call the Naha, described as fierce, elusive, dwelling in the mountain interior, not Dean and not any other known group. The Naha appear consistently in Dean oral tradition across multiple communities and multiple centuries of recorded account. They are not described as supernatural. They are described as human, or something very close to human, and as the probable cause of some of the deaths and disappearances that give the valley its reputation. Anthropologists who have recorded and studied the Naha accounts do not regard them as fantasy. They regard them as evidence of historical contact with a group whose identity and fate remain unresolved. No remains, no artifacts, no genetic material attributable to the Naha have ever been recovered from the Nahanni Valley. That absence, in a valley where the evidence of everything else is so abundant and so strange, is its own kind of answer. The valley has been studied by geologists and biologists and archaeologists and government surveyors. Its thermal anomalies have been measured. Its extraordinary biodiversity, plants and insects and bird species present at latitudes where they should not be able to survive, has been cataloged. The river has been mapped to centimeter-level precision by aerial survey. The warm sections of the valley floor have been photographed in every season. And the scientific literature on the Nahanni contains, alongside all of this legitimate and careful research, a persistent strain of the phrase requiring further investigation, not because the scientists are lazy or incurious or underfunded, but because the valley, every time someone has tried to finish explaining it, has produced another measurement that does not quite fit the explanation just arrived at. The Nahanni is the #1 location on this list because it is the place where the most different kinds of scientific inquiry have been brought to bear, and where the most different kinds of unexplained observations have accumulated, and where the combination of the geological and the biological and the historical and the human produces something that no single discipline has been equipped to address, and that all of them together have not, as of today, resolved. The South Nahanni River is still running. The warm sections of the valley floor are still warm. Virginia Falls is still falling. The scientists are still arguing. And somewhere in the Mackenzie Mountains, the Naha, or whatever the Dean oral tradition is recording, remains exactly as unlocated as it has always been. 13 locations. 13 places where the instruments produced readings that the textbooks did not predict, and the explanations did not arrive. 13 entries in the permanent, unresolved ledger of things that science knows are real and cannot yet fully account for. There is a version of this video that would tell you all of this is explainable, that the lights over Moberly Lake are ball lightning, that the sounds in Hudson Bay are ice, that Ogopogo is a misidentified sturgeon or a log, that the Falcon Lake burns are contact dermatitis and the radiation a coincidence, that the Nahanni Valley is simply an ecosystem that has not been fully studied. That version of the video exists, and it is not dishonest. All of those alternative explanations have been advanced by credentialed people in serious publications, and some of them are probably correct. But here's the thing about that version of the video. It would have to pretend that the measurements don't say what they say. It would have to wave past the government radiation report on Falcon Lake. It would have to dismiss the University of New Brunswick team's electromagnetic readings in the Miramichi Valley. It would have to explain why the plumes in Lake Superior are colder than the deepest measured depth water in the lake, without invoking a source of cold water that has not been found. And it would have to tell the Syilx Okanagan people that the entity they have been describing in Okanagan Lake since before written records reach is a misidentification, not a metaphor, not a cultural construction, a misidentification of a log that recurs with enough consistency and specificity over enough centuries to be encoded in the ceremonial life of a nation. That is a hard sell, and it gets harder the more carefully you listen. Canada is treated as a rational, modern, well-mapped, scientifically legible country. And it is all of those things. It is also 10 million square kilometers of land, much of it wilderness so profound that the satellite maps are the only thing that has ever really visited it. It is geology so old that the physics of its magnetic fields still surprise people who have been studying them for careers. It is lakes so deep and cold that their floors remain as practically inaccessible as the surface of the moon. It is a valley in the Northwest Territories that is measurably warmer than everything around it, for reasons that 4 different geological surveys have declined to definitively state. The mystery in most of these cases is not that we have no data. We have data. We have measurements and readings and reports and published papers and government files. The mystery is that the data keeps pointing at something that the current models cannot accommodate. And the honest scientific response to that situation is not to dismiss the data, but to admit that the models are incomplete. That is what science does when it is working properly. It looks at the reading that does not fit, and it says, then our understanding needs to be larger than it currently is. Canada is larger than its understanding. That is not a failure. It is an invitation. And these 13 locations are the map's blank spaces, each one a specific, measured, documented place where the invitation has been extended and the full answer has not yet arrived. If you made it to the end of this video, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. The person who wants the full story, not the comfortable version. The person who can sit with a question that does not have a clean answer and find that more interesting than a question that does. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell so the next video finds you. And if you know someone who thinks Canada is too sensible and too modern to have genuine mysteries in it, send them this. The Nahanni Valley alone should fix that. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.
Disclaimer. This video has been created solely for educational and informational purposes, educational and documentary. The content is based on an analysis of historical hypotheses and private research, in particular the works of R. Nicolai, which may differ from generally accepted scientific data. We do not claim that the theories presented are definitively true and encourage open scientific discussion. All materials are used under fair use for critical analysis and commentary. The author does not condone misinformation and recommends that viewers consult peer-reviewed scientific publications to obtain a complete picture.